Police finally made a breakthrough. Recent technological advancements identified Jacqueline Jacob, Gregory's great aunt, as one of the poison pen writers. She was placed under formal investigation for his kidnapping on Friday. Her husband is a suspected accomplice.
It's evident that several people are responsible for this crime. A few days before the act took place, surveillance was carried out by a man with a moustache, and he was sometimes accompanied by a woman.
This possible allusion to the murdered Bernard Laroche, who was originally a suspect in 1984, adds another twist to the tale. Investigators say jealousy over Jean-Marie Villemont's social standing could have driven some members of the family to commit the crime.
And we'll have more news for you later. Time now for the world this week. It's the world this week, 7 days, 4 Paris space correspondents, 1 hour. The world this week, in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us.
Why are you laughing?
Because how are you?
Fine.
All right. Also with us is Mira Kavdar, editorial writer for the International New York Times.
Nice to be here.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you as well, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed-Rabo. And joining us is Pierre Aski, co-founder of Rue 89, the news website, and whose latest book is...
Le droit au bonheur, the right to happiness.
The right to happiness, which is about...
Which is the right title for the right time in France.
Yes, we'll be talking about this idea of happiness versus pessimism.
But we talked about that when the book came out, and it was still time of pessimism. And today we seem to be moving towards happiness. Hopefully.
Times are changing. We'll talk about that a little bit later because there are legislative elections coming up. The World This Week, by the way, on Facebook and Twitter, #World This Week. First, though, breaking news. Former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, the architect of German reunification, has died. He was 87, Germany's longest-serving post-war chancellor. From 1982 to 1998, he was a driving force behind the introduction of the European single currency, a deepening of ties with France. But most of all, he was the one in charge in 1989 when the wall fell.
We Germans don't have too many reasons to be proud of our history, but I have every reason to be proud of those years when I was Chancellor. I have nothing better, nothing to be more proud of than German reunification.
Nothing to be more proud of. Amr Abed-Rabo, he's the Chancellor of West Germany when he takes over from Helmut Schmidt in 1982. And even during those momentous days of November 1989, there were still so many uncertainties. Would the two Germanys be able to unite without the economy collapsing? What would happen to the infrastructure, to everything? And he was confident about it all working.
It's an amazing move. It's an amazing career. It's really... I have no words to describe the politician or the statesman or the person who just left. Even if, though I still have, as someone who is originally from Syria, you know, last year he was a bit criticizing Angela Merkel. He received Viktor Orban, who's very close to a fascist. So the end of the... Last year, or the last few positions were not that amazing, but still, what a career.
But you remember back those days in 1989, you said you were in Berlin when the wall fell.
I was in Paris when the wall fell, but with friends, I was studying at Sciences Po, Political Sciences Institute, and we decided to leave in the night and to drive all the way to Berlin. We arrived early morning, and it was amazing. We were all like stringers, and we were all young students, so we had no assignment, we had nothing to do exactly, but to be there and try maybe to sell some photos.
And it was unsure whether Kohl's gamble to say, we're going to absorb the former East Germany was going to work.
It was totally unconceivable. I mean, it was something that everybody would say, what a stupid move, it won't work. these two countries are so different, etc. Today it seems natural.
What was the secret of his longevity as the longest-serving chancellor of Germany in post-war?
I think, you know, he was the key man at key moments. And I remember, and I think for most French people, he will be remembered as the man who stood hand in hand with François Mitterrand
1984.
In 1984 in Verdun, which was the site of one of the worst battles of the First World War between France and Germany. And these two men who were old enough to have lived through the Second World War, standing like that was such a strong and powerful symbol of the French-German reconciliation that I think that's what French people will definitely remember. And that has given him, it gives an idea of what the man stood for in important moments. And definitely, you know, in 1989, I was the diplomatic correspondent of Libération, and the key question was what's going to happen to the stability of the Cold War. You know, there was still the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was sympathetic to the changes, but could he accept the end of East Germany? You know, you had Soviet tanks in East Germany. Vladimir Putin was a KGB agent in East Germany. I mean, you see all this. Were question marks. What about the borders? You know, there was a long and tough discussion about the eastern border, the Oder-Neisse line with Poland. I mean, all these questions were totally unsolved, and events were going so fast. I was in Dresden, in East Germany, when in December '89, there was the first demonstration in which the slogan was unification. And no one was expecting it so quickly, you know. So fast. And François Mitterrand was arriving in East Berlin on an official visit, end of December. And I had been driving from Dresden and told the French delegation, I'd just come back from a demonstration, people were shouting, we want reunification. And the French said, oh, no, it's impossible. We won't have that. It's unacceptable. Gorbachev will be replaced by a general. That was the big theory of Mitterrand. He was, for him, it was inconceivable that events could go that fast. And in the end, Kohl and the main leaders of that time, Gorbachev, Bush Sr. in the US, Mitterrand, Thatcher in the UK, played it in such a way that it went smoothly. And one of the biggest changes of the end of the 20th century went on pretty smoothly.
Yeah, it's Kohl and Mitterrand both had to convince their own electorate later that it was a good idea to share a common currency.
Well, and some of those electorates are still not convinced, right? I mean, although the election of Emmanuel Macron as someone who strongly believes in not only the common currency, but the European Union does show that, at least in France, that's prevailed. But there's still resistance to that notion in Europe. And, the European Union has kind of went from there to a high. It kind of sunk into a period of crisis, and now it seems like there's hope for it to come back out. But
how will Helmut Kohl be remembered in your view?
Well, I think right now everybody will remember him in a very positive light, and probably deservedly so. I mean, he was a tremendous statesman. He was able to accomplish an enormous amount. As Pierre was saying, there was a lot of resistance to the idea of a united Germany. It wasn't that it just seemed impractical or difficult. I think the French, and Mitterrand particularly, they understood perfectly well that it would throw the entire balance of the European Union, as it was then created, completely up in the air. Because suddenly, instead of half of Germany, you're going to have all of Germany. And the center of gravity moves definitely toward the east. And then Germany opens up to the east.
And Mitterrand was wary.
And Mitterrand was very wary. And
you know the quote from Mauriac, a French writer, he said, we love so much Germany that we prefer to have two.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's also a little bit like the old truism about NATO. NATO was formed to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and Germany down. Yeah. And that was all out the window after unification. But the other thing that happened, and I think with a couple of days' reflection people will talk about this, is that Germany became such a heavy force of gravity that it pulled Eastern Europe apart. Genscher, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the foreign minister of Germany, his initiatives toward former Yugoslavia were instrumental in tearing Yugoslavia apart and launching what was the most horrible war Europe has seen since World War II.
The wars in the former Yugoslavia. Yeah, more to come on the death of Helmut Kohl in our upcoming editions. We're going to turn our attention now to the UK, where the Queen herself came to central London earlier to meet with residents, volunteers, and emergency services at a centre helping those affected by London's apartment building fire that's left at least 30 dead, many more still missing. Her visit was met with cheers and appreciation. Elsewhere, though, the anger rising. This Friday evening in London, Theresa May had to be whisked away from a meeting with survivors of that fire amid reports the type of cladding chosen a few years back to insulate the exterior of Grenfell Tower, £2 cheaper per square meter than the fire-resistant strain.
I've been crying so much, I don't know how I'm feeling anymore. They've lost everything. They want questions and answers. Why? What happened? Why did it happen?
And this is really much more than just a tragedy, Christopher Dickey. This has really fueled this feeling that the government's not looking out for those less well-off.
Well, and it comes at an absolutely critical moment. I mean, Theresa May still has not been able to put together her new government. She lost the mandate she was looking for. She lost seats, lost her absolute majority in Parliament very recently. And the question is, does she have the political stuff to hold things together? And her performance in the wake of this, according to our London correspondent, Nico Hines, in the Daily Beast, it's like the Katrina moment in the United States. This is such a disaster. It moves people so profoundly, and her response has been so mediocre and so really cold that...
she's been criticized for arriving late to meet with victims.
Well, first of all, at first she didn't meet with the victims. She met with people, with the rescue workers and with the police, which was all very good. But it was as if she didn't dare meet with the victims. And Jeremy Corbyn, her main rival, the head of the Labour Party, who everybody had written off as a complete nut, he goes, he meets with the victims, he embraces them. It's all over the papers, all over television. And people are like, why do we have this cold person as our prime minister? And why don't we pay more attention to Jeremy Corbyn?
All right, you mentioned it being like after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the 24-story social housing project located in a working-class part of North Kensington. The broader neighborhood also home to some of the most expensive real estate on the planet. For many, this tragedy is also a growing tale of inequality in urban areas. There you see the areas where that are more poverty-stricken than others in this area between Kensington and Chelsea, and there's where Grenfell Tower is located. Mira Kamdar, of course, the fear is that these people are going to be relocated far away from the center of London as just the pressures of gentrification push against the center of the city.
Right. I mean, you could even suggest very cynically that for some of the property developers in that area, it's a good thing that the tower burned. There's even been a suggestion, because apparently there's some very posh apartment blocks immediately adjacent to where the Grenfell Tower was that are empty, that full of apartments, because there's a lot of absentee ownership among very wealthy purchasers of apartments in London, as in New York and some other cities. And so I've even heard, seen in the press some suggestions, well, they should be moved into there. You have empty apartments in these posh... Corbyn said that. Okay, right. And I think that underlines the growing inequality in the UK, the fact that Theresa May's government, even before the disastrous parliamentary elections, and Cameron's government before, had been cutting social programs, had not been addressing this issue at all. There was this surge for Corbyn in the parliamentary vote. So people were already, before this horrible tragedy, focusing on that as an issue. And, you know, we were saying earlier, a picture is worth 1,000 words. What is a tragedy like this worth in terms of driving home symbolically the grotesque inequalities and the callousness of the government that personified by Theresa May and her behavior?
Would this be possible in France, this kind of...
I don't see why it shouldn't be possible, because maybe things are worse in terms of inequality, privatization in the UK, obviously. But I think the root problem, which is the inequality and the kind of double penalty, you're poor and you live obviously in worse conditions, in which you will save, as you said, £2 on a system that would prevent fire from spreading so quickly. I think that's happening all over our countries, where and it feeds into the mood for rebellion that we've had in the past few months all across Europe and the US, where the losers of globalization, people who see part of the society benefit from globalization, this is glaring, and as you said, the symbolic dimension of the picture of this burning social flats tower is really incredible, and I think it resonates in France as deeply as it does in the UK.
The only thing in France, I don't know any tower like this, HLM. You know,
it would be out in the banlieue. You wouldn't see it.
Yeah, and there were some like small hotels a couple of years ago, small hotels of 5 floors or something, but very similar to this tragedy, but with much less victims, of course. Now it raises also, as you mentioned, the problem of the double standards and the privatization,
and also
the money.
It isn't actually clear that these people were the victims of globalization. In fact, you could argue that they were the people who were taking advantage of globalization. If you look at the people who were living in the building, there were people from all over the world. There were people from Africa. There was a Syrian refugee.
The first victim is a Syrian refugee.
Yeah, but it's not because you're an Afghan or a Syrian refugee, because the first victim that was named was actually a Syrian student in London. It's not because you come from countries that could be described as victims of globalization that you're not, once you are in the developed world, marginalized in the social
you
spectrum.
can be marginalized, but the idea is that you're on a track that will eventually take you out of that. Now, if you don't get out of that, that's where we have huge problems. But my impression was that a lot of the people in that building were relatively recent arrivals.
All right, when we come back, we're going to see on this side of the channel what the prospects are in terms of tackling injustice in France ahead of the second round of legislative elections. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.